So, Digby, it's the first show of the new year for us here at Ring of Fire. So, let's just look back. I want to just buttonhole this and get your sense of what the biggest story may have been in 2016. Obviously, the election of Donald Trump, but subsidiary to that, maybe within the election, because we're hearing a lot about the Russia issue, and we can discuss that a little bit later. But I'm curious, just in terms of your take, and I know you've written this, so I know what that take is. But I tend to agree with you actually. What the biggest story that came out of 2016?
Right. Well, Happy New Year, Sam.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, I had obviously, the idea of a foreign government interfering in an election. It's a big story. We don't really know the details. We don't know what's going to come out. And even if it does turn out that all of the things that are being alleged actually happened, I think it's a hard case to make that it was ultimately decisive. It was a very close election. So there are, dozens of different decisions and events that happened that you can look to say if something had not happened or they'd done it differently, the election result might have been different. But there is one thing that happened that I think has been conclusively proven to have been decisive, and that is the James Comey letter. In fact, the entire James Comey activities during the election, I think, were decisive. When you look back at, what the primary story surrounding the Clinton campaign was, it was, quote, emails. Now, that wasn't entirely Comey, but what he did when he went outside normal prosecutorial guidelines in the summer, right around the convention period, and announced that he was not going to prosecute, and then went on to, actually, in my view, engage in character assassination. What he did was he set that up to go into the fall campaign as still being a live issue, and one which, the threat of prosecution, which was hanging over the Clinton campaign through the whole thing, and which was being encouraged by the Trump campaign with their, chance of lock her up. This was something that I think played very heavily in the minds of certain people, thinking, hey, this woman is potentially going to be prosecuted as president. How is that going to work? This is terrible. Think of the scandals, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that was something that was at play. When in the fall, then, we get into this, the final days of the campaign, and he dropped that letter. And sent it to, I should mention before we even get to that, he also made another decision that was very, very questionable. He decided to allow the Congress to have access to the investigation notes, the raw investigation notes of the FBI. That's never happened before.
Right.
And not only did he give it to them, he gave it to them in dribs and drabs, which allowed leaking, to create a new story every time something like that came out. So that was very unusual. And then again, we get to this letter in the final days, which, according to the pollsters, and I'm talking about pollsters for both campaigns, both Trump and the Clinton campaign, agreed.
As well as third party. I mean,
Yes.
Nate Silver has said this explicitly.
Absolutely. The people who looked at the data saw the change from the Comey letter in that it was 11 days out from the campaign. People were already voting when this happened. And the change in the, in the polling was dramatic. And it actually tracked with things that had happened previously in the campaign when these, when some kind of, like, for instance, the Access Hollywood tape for Trump, a similar thing happened where he showed a big drop. What would happen is that it would drop, and then there would be a restoration of equilibrium, which had Clinton winning by several points. I mean, it was a decisive win, I should say, maybe not substantial, but decisive. There was no time. Him doing that at the end of the campaign, and then weirdly enough, on the Sunday before Election Day, coming out and saying, well, we didn't find anything, actually just, reinforced the whole thing again. There was little doubt from all the pollsters, all the numbers crunchers, the people who were watching this closely, that letter had an effect, and that it basically, this was a very close election, around 80,000 votes across a few states in the Midwest made the difference, and there's no doubt that the polling was affected by the Comey letter. So to me, that is the story, and the reason it's the story isn't just, oh gosh, gee, what a drag that happened. This is the head of the FBI who did this.
That's the thing, and I have to, first of all, let me just say that completely without any arrangement, I was on Chris Hayes' program 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, doing a similar thing, and the question was, what was who would you name if not Trump the person of the year? And I said James Comey for this exact reason. There is no doubt that the election shouldn't have been as close. There was no doubt that, in my mind anyways, that the Clinton campaign did not run the best campaign towards Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different reasons for the outcome of the election that we got, but the one person who, if you literally took them out of the equation, there would have been a different outcome. It would have been James Comey. And with all this talk about the Russia stuff, and we can go back and forth. I haven't seen evidence from one side or another, frankly, as to whether or not Russia engaged in this. And even if they did, like you said, it's probably not determinative. And even if they did, it's not terribly surprising, right? I mean, we engage in this stuff as well. I think the more disturbing issues are with what Donald Trump's relationship with Russia is. But the idea that we have the chief, short of the head of the Department of Justice, the chief law enforcement official in the country engaging in something like this is very, very problematic. And we don't know James Comey's motivations, but I can tell you, I have spoken to numerous individuals who worked in the public corruption division of the Department of Justice in the States, one of whom actually sat in an auditorium where James Comey said, when this guy just started working there, James Comey addressing them said, the most important thing is that we never, ever, ever get involved in an election, if you can believe this. I mean, this was stated policy. You don't bring charges against someone in an election, even if you have all the evidence. Never mind talk about their investigation. James Comey broached it. I mean, what does this say about what's going on within our government, not just in the political parties?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think we have some evidence that there was some kind of shenanigans going on in the New York FBI office, which was extremely hostile to Clinton and literally pro-Trump. But that's rumors. I don't know if it's true. There's a guy named James Kallstrom who is a very high-level former FBI agent who's very close with Rudy Giuliani and, very pro-Trump. And, there was a lot of talk about that being some kind of pressure on Comey to do something. But there's no excuse for it because the head of the FBI coming out and saying something is far more damaging than some, anonymous rumors being floated in the press. I mean, which is what people are saying. Well, he did it because they were going to be leaking this information anyway. I mean, leaks are leaks, and it would have come out, and everybody, would have either believed it or not. But it wouldn't. When the FBI, the director of the FBI says something, everybody listens. And as we know, the press went completely crazy over it. And it's interesting because this idea that they don't interfere with elections, this is an issue that was very live very recently. Recall that one of the big scandals of the Bush administration was the firing of U.S. attorneys and replacing them with new people, many of whom were Republicans, if you recall. They fired the U.S. attorneys. The reason that they were fired is because they refused to interfere in elections. I mean, that was a directive that came from Alberto Gonzales, the Attorney General at the time, that they wanted them, and various political actors, by the way. The guy in New Mexico was a man named David Iglesias. I don't know if everybody remembers that name, but it was famous for a few minutes. He was one of the fired U.S. attorneys, and he had received calls from Republican officials demanding that he bring charges against a Democratic candidate that was running. He refused. This was in advance of the election. He said no. They were very, very upset. In fact, they hung up on him. I guess it was Senator Pete Domenici was one of
Yep.
He hung up on him, and he refused because these were the guidelines that you're talking about that James Comey said at that meeting with the guy that you talked to. This was so well known, and these U.S. attorneys were following those guidelines. It happened in Washington State too, and they were fired for that and replaced with Bush, loyalists. In these U.S. attorney spots. And, this was one of the major scandals of the Bush administration. Now, James Comey at the time, I think, was working on Wall Street or for some major, law firm working with Wall Street at the time. He had left the government after his early, involvement in the whole John Ashcroft late night,
wireless
bedside savior of the country drama. And he had left the government, was working in the private sector. But I think he knew about this. I'm pretty sure he did because everybody knew about it. So, this is very interesting to me that he would do this after that had happened. And by the way, did anybody in the press mention this? That this was a previous big scandal in the Bush administration? I don't recall very many people bringing this up. But it was something that was very recently sort of litigated in the public consciousness that this is wrong, that the Justice Department, the FBI, law enforcement, and the Department of Justice do not interfere in elections. And they had it's like 60 to 90 days ahead of time that they just don't say a word. It's just, even if they've got the evidence, they've got them, dead to rights. They wait until the election because of this notion that law enforcement putting their finger on the scale, their thumb on the scale of an election is just, that's Banana Republic stuff. It really is. And the fact that Comey did this, and, I'm a little bit concerned that has there been any real pushback on this from civil liberties?
That is one of the complaints I have, frankly, about all the Russia brouhaha, is that ultimately that doesn't say, that says something maybe about the Russians or about, email security. And I don't know what it says about Donald Trump. Maybe that remains to be seen. But this is a much bigger problem that I think has been avoided in many respects because of all that talk. And it really does deserve more scrutiny.
I think so.
Hopefully we'll see it by historians and others. And, maybe Democrats should be focusing on this too, frankly. But Digby, we got to take a break. We'll be back in the next hour with more to discuss on this new Republican Congress that has already overreached.